All right, so both of you guys are very experienced C++ developers. Pete, you're even an educator. James, you are an enthusiast within the community. And I asked a question that you two kind of seem to disagree on a little bit. Hopefully that disagreement's still up in the air a little bit, and we can kind of hash it out. I think it's an interesting question to pose to both of you. And my question was, do you think that in the future, every DApp will eventually be running on its own chain? And Pete, you seem to think that that's the case, and James, you didn't so much. So let's start with Pete, and then we'll let the conversation run from there.
Yeah, I guess we both started typing our replies at the same time, and James was in the middle of typing absolutely not, and I was in the middle of typing obviously. Yeah. So maybe we mean different things. Maybe we're at complete odds, and our company will dissolve after this
Probably,
meeting.
yes.
Very likely.
As a business owner, you want to have full confidence that the infrastructure you're running on isn't going to pull some kind of, there's not going to be any curveball, right? You don't want to be relying on a blockchain, and as it is, these blockchains are like early stage. I don't know if I'll call them alpha because I'll insult every bag holder out there, but really early stage protocols that are trying to figure basic things out, trying to figure out how we can build these protocols so that they're usable, so that everyone has the resources they need, so that they can't be gamed, can't be rigged, can't be DDoSed, can't be whatevered. And as any DApp that's building on these protocols is taking a certain risk of a platform risk, and they feel this pressure to select one of these blockchains, to select Ethereum, select EOS, select Cardano, select IOST, Tron, whatever, Bitcoin, whatever they want to run on. They look at the pluses and minuses, but they have to deal with the simple fact that we don't know sometimes what the best answers to these questions are. We don't know what problems are going to come in the future by the very nature of the fact that it's the future. And so any one of these platforms may fail. When we're talking about investment advice, which we don't give on this unnamed show, but we say never invest more than you can afford to lose, and everything can go to zero, right? If people have this kind of idea. Everything can go to zero. It's all new. We don't know. There might be a bug. There might be a crash. Value might just be drained out of the system, whatever. I'm not saying that we have to sell everything and abandon blockchain because of that. But no business wants to be in a situation where there could be a bug with the platform, there could be a hostile entity on the platform, there could be something about the very nature of the platform that we haven't considered that drives it, crashes it, makes it unavailable, whatever. And my entire app, my business, the bread of my developers is built on that platform. So right. I think that apps will definitely look at becoming either multi-chain or having their own private, by private I don't mean obscured, but have their own permissioned or failover chain where no matter what, they know that they can get the resources and actions they need for their DApp on that chain.
Now, James, I saw you during Pete's answer there. It seemed like a rebuttal was brewing in your head there a bit. What do you have to say about this specifically?
So, I guess when you asked the question, I took it more as a long-term question.
Yes,
so where's the end goal? Where's blockchain leading us? Are we going to a place where every DApp company has their own blockchain? Is literally how the question was posed. Will every DApp have its own chain?
Right.
Not every DApp will have its own chain. Its own specific chain. Would you disagree with that? Or because I think that the two extremes of this question, will every DApp have its own chain or will every DApp share one chain, are both literally absurd. They're both.
Okay, so without
there's clearly going to be exceptions.
I wasn't making a semantic stance. Yes, every single DApp will have its own chain.
Sure.
What I meant is that we'll see a large trend towards DApp saying, We've dealt with gas costs on Ethereum. We moved to EOS. We thought we had free transactions and stuff, and then we had congestion. Mm-hmm. And now we don't want to just keep searching for new solutions and dealing with migration costs. So we're going to have at least a failover. And if you're not aware as a viewer or you, Evan, as my interviewer, failover is like a chain that you can use if you have problems on the main chain you're relying on.
Right.
It's a backup. It's a way to make sure you can always run no matter what the circumstances are.
So let's put it in this context. We have a client who, and we'll get back to kind of James's point of view on this as well, but just to kind of clarify what you're saying, we have a client who they're using an EOS solution that is allowing them to pay their employees, or their contractors rather. So you need that failover. You can't have these people who are doing work, honest work for you, be reliant on something that's over congested where they're waiting for their paycheck to pay the rent or put the next meal on the table or whatever the case may be, and you're saying, oh, well, sorry, we're having CPU issues right now, so
sorry,
you're going to have to wait.
is blocking the mainnet right
yeah, sorry
now,
about
so you're not going to
IDOS,
get paid.
and, you know, don't worry, it's going to be good in the long run. You might not get paid for a couple of months.
Just
here,
hodl,
but
just hodl,
just,
folks.
Right.
Yeah, just
Tell
hodl
your kids
paycheck.
to hodl their stomach pains.
So James,
So-
what do you say then to that?
Yeah, okay. Let me paint a picture of one possible future, right, for EOS.
this sounds right up my alley.
Yeah.
Pictures of possible
Here's
futures.
a beautiful picture for you, Pete. We get storage on base layer EOS, like file storage, hard drive space, because we're definitely going to. There's no way that Block 1 isn't working on it, and if they're not, somebody's going to implement base layer, fork EOSIO, and create base layer file storage on EOSIO. RAM becomes cache, file storage becomes file storage. So we can have decentralized front ends now at the base layer without using VRAM or some other third-party solution. My condolences. I think that's coming. That's my prediction anyway. So now you have, I mean, we know that the internet today, right? If we look at the internet today, can be run by a handful of entities. There's Amazon and Google and Microsoft, and if you take those three, they can basically run the entire internet infrastructure. The amount of resources required to run web infrastructure can be handled by relatively few entities. And I can't imagine that in a future where file storage is at the base layer of EOSIO, that the vast majority of apps will be able to afford the resources required to publish their dapps on some public, not federated chain, some public decentralized net. It doesn't have to be EOS necessarily, but just some public permission chain. It improves the auditability and the security and decreases costs in those ways, and the lack of middlemen decreases costs further. I think that the costs are going to approach the costs of what now you would have to pay to launch your DApp on something like Amazon Web Services, for example. Of course, there's always going to be a use case for a federated chain and a private chain. For example, any private data right now you can't really store on a public blockchain. So if you need some private data, you can use some DApp service perhaps, or you could use, what is it, Privios, I think it's called, is a solution right now, at least on EOS.
This just came out.
What is it? What are we looking at?
Pretty amazing. I just saw it in the bathroom. EY just released open source code for Ethereum that enables 20 zero-knowledge transactions on mainnet for 24 cents, a 400x improvement.
Interesting.
That's Ernst & Young.
That's a big deal. That's a big name company there.
Accounting firm.
That's a big
released,
four.
Yeah. That's pretty serious. But so
yeah, I'm saying there's always going to be use case
resources
for federated chains, but
right.
I think that a lot of the congestion issues and issues we see today in a budding mainnet are temporary. When we have base layer file storage, that RAM becomes what it should be and should have been all along, which is a cache layer. There's going to be, and I mean, the big problem is resources. So like if you look at BPs, maybe they're going to be able to share file storage with something like with IPFS. They're going to be able to kind of pool their resources in file storage, but computation is the limiting factor. So every one of them has to have the computational ability to process all the transactions on the blockchain, because it's redundancy. That's the feature of blockchain. It's one of the selling points. And because of that, you can't have the entire internet infrastructure on one chain. I don't think that's a viable solution. But I think that there's going to be, I mean, if you can have multiple huge dApps or apps running on a blockchain that can be a majority of the internet if the internet usage follows a Pareto distribution.
But what do you mean by a huge DApp? Like comparative to a centralized application, like for example, the amount of actions that are taken on Twitter, a centralized application, could EOS mainnet even handle that amount? And that's just one centralized application. Now, obviously, that's reached mass adoption, and that's where everyone wants the future of these decentralized applications to go. But could you ever even fit just one that's that large on EOS mainnet, or would you have to even silo out the amount of actions that are taking place on a single DApp if it actually ever reaches that point?
We do know that Voice, which was just announced today for February 14th, the beta, is running on multiple private and public blockchains. Now, I know that there's plans to scale both vertically and horizontally through use of like parallel processing and things like that. Just a single chain, but they're using multiple chains right now. So yeah, I guess Block One's decision is no. As it stands, we can't run a Twitter scale app.
Again, we have to distinguish here between like what is the case right now and where is the future we're heading towards. Because if you think about 10 years from now, and this is one possible future, I have no idea if this is going to happen, but you could imagine you have Amazon is a block producer on some EOSIO chain or some blockchain, not even EOSIO, but like their data centers, we know are capable of processing the transactions needed to run something like Twitter because they are. It's not something we have to think.
Yeah, but all of the block producers have to match that.
Exactly. Yeah, and all the validators. So we don't want all of the block. We don't want the entire internet to be on one chain. There needs to be horizontal scaling for the sake of decentralization. Otherwise, the cost of becoming a block producer or validator is too high, and you sacrifice decentralization. But like I started to say, like all of the internet traffic, right, follows a what would be called a Pareto distribution, where you have 80% of the traffic happening on 20% of the websites, and recursively. So then of that 80% of that is happening on 20% of those websites. Of those servers. And so you can have a huge amount of traffic being processed on if the block producers have the computational capacity to do it. And it's really the RAM that's the limiting factor, because there's ways that you can pool. Yes, there's ways you can sacrifice redundancy to increase your scalability for the sake of file storage, but the RAM is the limiting factor. And if we increase RAM by a few orders of magnitude over the next 20 years, and we have file storage on the base layer, I don't see any reason why we couldn't have that, like a couple massive dApps, Twitter scale, Facebook, whatever, as all on the same chain. And of course, there's going to be a long tail of other applications that are going to need and actually, like Voice is doing, they're probably all going to have their own chains behind the scenes anyway, doing small things and holding private data, unless somebody can solve that. Maybe this
so for the past
Young solution,
Ernst & Young solution, maybe. And also Blockstream is looking into ZK snarks on Bitcoin on the side chain, which is actually interesting. But anyway, that's not really relevant to what we're talking about. So you're saying that, so for the past few years, we've kind of had two mindsets in the industry, two ways companies can go. You remember this, that a company could either pick to develop on like public Ethereum or public EOS or whatever in the future, or something like Hyperledger or Coda or private Ethereum, what was Quorum, right? So a company would either choose to build its application on an entirely private blockchain or one monolithic, entirely public blockchain. Are we starting to see that space between fill out?
Yeah.
To where the answer will be somewhere between there, where we have a mix of like Voice just as one app, but especially when you look at all the apps, we have a mix of private and permissioned. We have a mix of permissioned and public blockchains working, and dApps can customize what they want, what they want to run on. Do they want to run all on EOS? Do they want to take that risk that there's going to, you're talking long term, right, it's going to be reliable, but right now, every business builder needs to not think about 10 years from now. They do, but they also have to pay the bills until then.
Sure.
Right? So what path do you think should a dapp developer take now?
Oh man,
who's building a dapp and looking at all these options.
Dapp developers right now have to realize that they are at the cutting edge of still brand new technology. I'm sorry, but we're not ready for the type of mass adoption that I think a lot of people think we are or hope that we are. If you're building on a blockchain right now, you are exposing yourself to all kinds of risk because it's just such a brand new industry, and it's in fact a brand new fundamental infrastructure to the way applications run.
It's risks of unknown.
It's
unknown risks of unknown quantity and unknown everything. Yeah.
So it's a good question. It's a hard question for right now. What should a dapp developer do? I think if you want to hedge your bets a bit, you would want to consider something like a dapp which spans multiple chains on the back end, or at least just make sure that your infrastructure for your app is agile enough to switch chains, or you have to be agile because something like this that happened on EOS that we're all especially familiar with, where all of a sudden Rex locked up and hardly anyone anticipated that, and now you can't transact. That's a big problem for businesses and for people whose livelihood depends on that. That's too much risk. You need to have a solution in place that allows you to be agile and deal with unexpected consequences of a young technology.
But your solution is not going to be able to fail over to Ethereum. If you're running an app that needs high transaction volume, and that's why you picked EOS, your solution is not going to be to fail over to Cardano because it doesn't exist yet. Yeah. Your solution is not going to...
Testnet.
So what... Testnet? You're going to fail over to Testnet?
No, I'm just saying.
Fail over to Kylan.
It's coming. Cardano's coming. No, I think that right now... I honestly think right now EOSIO is the only game in town. Like, if you need a high throughput blockchain, it needs to be, infrastructure quality, industry standard, that EOSIO is really the only game in town.
Right, EOSIO, but if you're a big dapp, should you have a chain of your own ready to go to fail back on in case there's an unforeseen... I'm not... saying that these things aren't going to succeed in the long run. Maybe they will, but an unforeseen problem, no matter how temporary, if you get shut down for 2 weeks, that can destroy a business, especially when blockchain businesses often thrive because blockchain enables new low margin forms of business. We have these huge centralized power structures in traditional companies, and they require large margins to keep them going. Well, when you have this decentralized structure, you have things like maybe Eva, I guess it's French, right? So Eva. The co-op, the Uber kind of surrogate,
ride sharing,
Uber replacement, ride sharing in Montreal. They give their drivers more money and take less from their riders because they cut out a lot of the middle crap that's in the big gilded tower at Uber or Lyft, right? Well, the gilded tower, I guess they're not doing so well, but so you cut out a lot of that, and it enables new lower margin forms of business. And like, you can't take suddenly being shut down for a few weeks. You can't take being suddenly shut down for a couple of months. So should a dapp that's building right now on EOS or Telos or Wax or Boss or Eurochain or Warbly or Lynx or Meet1 or any of these EOSIO chains, how should they set up, how should they anti-fragile themselves?
Yeah, that's a tough question.
I submit it's by having your own EOSIO chain that you can
it comes full circle.
That you can run. You can always be sure that, look, we want to run on public chain. We're committed to public chain for matters of principle or whatever. But if we have to, we can fall back onto our failover chain.
Yeah.
So the user experience in that case would look like what? You're still using that app's front end, so they can just switch the front end to send the transactions to their chain.
You could fork EOSIO, so all accounts. You could have accounts across the chains as well.
Sure.
You don't have. The user does not even need to know.
Well, the way you would know, okay, from a power user perspective, I'm saying though, you wouldn't be able to go to Blocks.io and see the confirmation of your transactions that were happening on this dapp anymore. Right. And then what? I guess the best practice would be that you're federate your single node chain you have running on your own server publishes some hashes to the main chain, so you can still be auditable, but you're not. Your whole chain isn't exposed. It's not a public chain.
Well, you could be auditable by being permissioned but public on your chain.
Okay.
And then you could also be auditable by publishing hashes, like you said, to main chain at a much decreased frequency.
Yeah, I'm fully on board with that vision, especially short term. I think that's just a wise business move.
I think it's interesting. It's definitely an awesome conversation. And just to kind of segue, I guess, into the last question that I want to ask you guys, if someone were to come to me and ask what kind of dapp they wanted to build, I think I would even back up a little bit and say, are we at a point right now with any blockchain technology where we need to be focused on the end user? Are we even there yet? Or do we need to look into more building out of the infrastructure or doing things in the middleware space, kind of like how Liquid Apps is doing right now, where we need to put these things in place to make sure that we have the infrastructure down pat before we bring on end users and bring in all this risk? You're shaking your head no.
I think you've got a false dilemma there. I don't think it's binary. I don't think it's like 10 years of building infrastructure and then suddenly we abandon that and do 10 years of focusing on the user.
Sure.
We're shifting. You can see how wallets are becoming more usable, and there's this progression towards usability. We're still in that middle spot where if you're completely technically inept, blockchain apps, cryptocurrency, dapps, they're probably not for you right now. But you don't have to be a total cypherpunk to get them.
Right.
We're in that middle spot. And I think we're in that middle spot where it's appropriate to attribute focus to both things. Like Liquid Apps, not shilling, right? But we've got things like Liquid Accounts where we're trying to push, you can just log in with a user and password. That's it. You don't need to deal with a wallet or keys. You can if you want, but if you don't want to, that's safely, handled. But then also things like Liquid Scheduler, which what user ever needs to know the details of how that works? So it's like some things for developers, some things for users, and we're still in that middle ground where we're trying to convince both sides, look, you want to build these things and you want to use these things. Because adoption doesn't require just one or the other. It requires both.
I like that perspective, but you ruined my smooth segue into the final question. So now I'm just going to come out and ask it. Obviously, CPU issues is a huge thing. That's probably the biggest news right now, other than the voice launch date coming out for EOS. Do you guys think that there is a solution to this? I know, Pete, you were at the Liquid Apps Hackathon talking with some real powerful brains in the room. Maybe you could give the condensed version of what they kind of came up with, or what you agreed with, or what you disagreed with. And then James, you and I, when we were in Malta about a month ago, were looking at Dan's proposal for a new sort of voting metric. And
Dan's proposal to me was more of a governance solution as opposed to a resource congestion solution. So I definitely think that the path forward is going to include some components of what Dan proposed, namely his stake pools. I think it's extremely important that we tie long-term chain commitment to your vote weight. I think that's a way that is going to effectively align voters with the long-term interest of the chain. So I think that there's governance issues. Obviously, there's governance issues right now. We know about it. And then with things like one token, one vote, or one token, one divisible vote on the horizon, I think we're going to solve a lot of the Sybil attack issues. I think that the collaboration, the word anyway, collusion. Thank you. I think a lot of the collusion
How
issues,
could you not know a vocabulary word of the year 2019?
Yeah, seriously. I think that there's solutions on the horizon for a lot of the governance issues of EOS. Now, whether they can get approved remains to be seen. I'm not yet, like some people are, negative on that idea. I think it's possible. I think it's very possible that it does get approved because it's in the long-term best interest of the chain. And you want to talk about what your vision is for the resources, if we have a solution in mind for that?
Real quick, though, do you see perhaps someone launching another EOS chain where if the mainnet can't approve Dan's proposal for the governance, what's stopping someone else from just coming out with basically Dan's vision, as we joked about?
Yeah.
Forking.
EOS Dan's
Right.
vision.
Right. Do you see
real
that
Dan
happening
Larimer would
eventually?
probably
Because
launch that.
we did read the proposal, read it multiple times while we were flying around, and I like it. I mean, it's worth a shot at least.
No, there's nothing stopping anyone from launching a sidechain that implements Dan's proposal. I think that you would have a hard time because of network effects getting the amount of users you would need for it to be successful. It's not impossible, but
All right, we haven't seen that kind of initiative be very successful with
Right.
other communities before.
yeah. I think that the name brand of EOS has a lot of value, and I really hope that we can, as a community, push the block producers, press the block producers however we can to get them to approve the changes that we think best suit the long-term health of the chain. I'm still on the main chain bandwagon in that respect.
See, it all comes down to main chain versus
I
side
know.
chain.
I appreciate this perspective, and again, it has a little bit more of a long-term focus. Like, we believe in the health of the chain, we believe in the health of the mission, what we're here for. But for developers, for dapps, for users, there's like, what do we do in the meantime? Mm-hmm. And first, I agree with some other people who have said that I don't think you're never going to be able to make it impossible to DDoS a network unless you do something like Link's chain is doing with their like permissioned like whitelisting
Right.
and all that. You can't make it impossible to DDoS a public network. You can DDoS Bitcoin, you can DDoS Ethereum, whatever, but you have to pay for it. It's the same with
Right.
EOS. Someone is paying for a lot of the things going on with IDOS right now. Now, and that's the beauty of it. You can't pay for it forever. So the question is how long. But in the interim, dapps, businesses, users, people, they need a solution. So I guess it comes back to the same thing I was arguing for before. They need a failover. They need a fallback. They need some way to ensure that no matter what storms hit the public net, it doesn't shut them down. And even in the future where like maybe this infrastructure will have so much capacity that the dapps can all run smoothly on it, you remember what happens when the AWS goes down. I don't know if you remember that there was a day maybe last year or the year before where like you go to Twitter and it doesn't work.
Yeah.
You try to get on Facebook
half the internet went
because
down.
we had Facebook back then. But that Facebook doesn't work. You can't Google something. Yeah, the internet's going down in the Northeast or whatever because AWS went down. Even though they have this immense amount of power, this immense amount of security, this immense amount, outages still happen. And so in the future, things might still happen. The entire purpose, one of the purposes of blockchain and decentralized systems is to make them more fail-proof, more fault-proof, more compromise-proof. And so I think that it's part of the philosophy of everything to want to decentralize out of a single chain so that if something happens to the chain you're on, you still run. And you might fully intend to get back on ship when the waters are calm again. But, in the meantime, you need a backup.
Yeah.
So that's what I was saying when I said I thought every dApp would have their own chain. Maybe it's dApps get together and have confederations of chains or whatever. But I think that's part of the future backup plan.
I think
especially if they can spin them up very easily. No further comment.
Well, I think it's a super interesting conversation. I'm glad that we had a chance to sit down and do it. Maybe we ought to do this again. I know I kind of mashed two subjects together in the last question there, but for sake of brevity, why not? One more question just to leave off. This is a big, important one. Pete, of all the games behind you, which one should we break out and play for the rest of the night?
Oh man, Scythe is beautiful, but it's definitely a slog fest. You'll play for like 20 minutes and you realize you just produced a bale of corn. And you're like, I'm in control of mech armies and I just worked through 5 turns to produce a bale of corn.
I thought you were going to say Istanbul.
Istanbul's great, but Unearth is also a really great game that we could consider. And
Is that
you
the
can get
Ethereum logo?
That does look like the Ethereum logo on the left there.
Yeah, it is
Wow.
like the Ethereum logo. Maybe we can throw it up on the screen. Unearth. It's actually
Unearth.
available at Barnes & Noble. And if you use our discount code, there's no affiliate code.
Use Don't Worry Be Dappy for 20% off, Barnes & Noble. All right, well, I don't really know how to outro this because this isn't really planned, but this was like a developer roundtable discussion, and if we have any other cool subject matter in the future, maybe we'll come out with it and put it on this
right.
channel.
Cue the amazing music.